strong impact statements. So why do we do this? Perhaps needless to say, it's critical for all of us to communicate the results and the value of our work. It really can help foster support for your projects and programs, both with partners. I know there's been a lot more talk about partnering with other agencies and nonprofits and community groups, so it can help them see shared goals and interests and the change that you're both trying to make. And it's also very effective with funders. Of course, you know, being a publicly funded institution, we're expected to be accountable and we need to do reporting. We can't just say we're doing good work. We need to be able to demonstrate that we're making a difference for the clientele who we serve. And then, as many of you know, if you're a cooperative extension academic in the A&R merit promotion process, it is a required part of that. Under your themes, you write an impact statement, essentially. You write your methods and then you write about your outcomes. So let's get to it. So how do we connect our work to impact? So describing your impact is not, that's a red X, through talking about your methods. As scientists, it's very often important to figure out those different methods and do all of the research. And it's really important to come up with your publications and get those findings out there. But that's not what we mean by impact. By impact, we're talking about the benefits to your program participants and to the public more broadly. This is a bit of a refresher from the measuring outcomes training, but it's a pitfall that we see year and year again. So we wanted to briefly refresh on this. And if you didn't participate, it's an important distinction to make in this work. So outputs are what you did, what you have control over, right? The activities that you organize and lead, the products that you create, it's your research findings, perhaps coming up with new models or new products, new plant varieties, developing new knowledge that is useful to our policy and decision makers. All of those things are huge, right? They take a lot of time and they're addressing critical need. It's just not what we mean by outcomes. However, we're going to give many examples about how you can connect those important accomplishments to the potential impact that they have. And then we often see in outcome sections, people write their publications, right? It takes a lot to be published in journals. And even if it's a prestigious journal, that's not an outcome. That is an important output of your work, but not an outcome. So when we talk about outcomes, what we mean are the benefit to your clientele and to the public that you work with. These are some definitions from Project Board, which is the information system for CE academics, and the ebook, which is part of the merit promotion process. So many of you will be familiar with this. These definitions stand true beyond those, but these are exactly what you'll see in these A&R systems. So outcomes include when your participants have changes in learning. That can be gaining knowledge or changing their attitudes or learning skills. We do a lot of skills building. It's also changes in action. Like we talked about during the measuring outcomes training, we're really trying to focus our limited time when we can on measuring changes in behavior, because those are very significant when people are changing their practices based on the science-based learning that we're extending to them. Over the last few years, A&R has also been focusing more attention on changes in policy making and decision making. So you all spend a lot of time developing science-based information that is then shared through relationships and partnerships with sort of big P policymakers at the legislative level, as well as smaller P at the school level. Maybe it's a healthy food initiative at the school. And then
Catherine?
I see Jim's hand. I'll get right to it. Thank you, Vikram. And then lastly are these changes in condition. And that's what we're going to be spending a lot of time talking about today. And those are those broader benefits to the public that are at the social health level, the economic level, or the environmental level. Jim.
Yeah, Catherine, I completely understand that publishing a paper is an output, but I'm wondering if that paper is then cited widely in the scientific literature, right? If other people are using that and building on it, that's not really a clientele and public benefit. So how can we include that kind of information?
Yeah, it's being used by peer academics, right, in the science community. I mean, in my opinion, that's showing use of those findings. We do tend to focus more on our benefits to our clientele and the public. I think you would definitely want to write that up like in your merit and promotion piece. If we're talking about something like a UC delivers, we may not focus on that sort of effort because that particular publication that we do, that blog, is about benefiting the community. But definitely for your merit and promotion, I would include that. And I think it goes beyond, like you said, it just being published, but people in the academic community are using it. And I know that's hugely significant in academia.
Thank
Does
you.
that
Yeah, perfect.
make sense? Any other thoughts on that? Vikram, do you have any comments?
Just to add a little bit, Jim, some of those citations may be happening in California, and people may be reading it, which can also feed into your clientele. It's a hypothetical situation, but that's also possible.
Yeah, good point. Thank you.
Sorry, Vikram, feed into what? I missed that.
I said that some of the people who are citing the particular work may be informing some of the work in California, and also some of the clientele may be reading it. If it is, especially if that informs the development of like a non-peer reviewed or an extension fact sheet or something like that, or a journal of extension publication, people are more likely to read it.
And actually, that also reminds me, I've been hearing over the last number of years that a lot of our clientele are very, what I've been heard called sophisticated clientele. You know, scientists that work in agencies and growers are even reading, you know, things that are published in scientific journals. So I think that's a good point. It's not just academics who are reading these things. And especially if you know that your growers or your clientele, and I know you work with a lot of agency people, Jim, you know, like at DPR, if you know that they read particular journals, I would include that in your write-up because then it is your clientele using that information, at least reading it, right? Great, thanks for that question. And please,
Catherine, I have a question.
Yeah.
So how about the funding that we get from the commodity boards or the continued funding from other agencies? Isn't that showing an impact, that our work is making an impact? That's why they're ready to continue with that research and funding our research programs. Will that be kind of like an impact?
Again, when we're thinking about impact, we're thinking about what you see on the slide here, the value of our program to those who do not directly benefit from it. And we'll be talking more about this. I would say that you definitely would want to communicate for your merit and promotion that to have ongoing funding is significant and important and demonstrates, you know, that funders see the value in your work, but that's not what we mean by impact. We really do mean benefit to clientele and the public. So it can be part of your story, but it would not be that impact section of your story.
Thanks, Catherine.
Mm-hmm. All right, so I think I just went over this slide. So let's talk a little bit more about private versus public value. So again, when we're writing about describing our impact, we want to make the connection between the private and the public value. That's really the focus of today's training. So what's the benefit to our program participant outcomes? And then how does that then connect to this longer term condition change? Let's look at a few examples. These are from Nancy Franz, who actually worked with us 4 years ago to develop our A&R public values and public value statements. I'll be sharing those with you today if you haven't seen them as a refresher. And she's nationally recognized as an expert in extension public values. She's published quite widely in the Journal of Extension and other places on this topic. So it was great to have her come and help us. And even before that, she worked with our 4-H program to develop their public value statements. So I wanted to share some of her sort of nationwide extension examples. We're not the only ones doing this. I think we're recognized for taking it sort of above and beyond. But it's very much part of what extension has been focusing on for the last 10 or 20 years. Okay, so in 4-H, a private value might be the youth that we work with are staying out of court, right? That would be huge. This must be like a risk diversion type program. And the public value, the benefit to the community would be potentially that there's reduced costs for some of our public services. If we're thinking about an ag research and extension program, A private value would be the grower participants are using improved methods, our science-based methods. And the benefit more broadly could be improved rural economy and environment, depending on what those methods are. If we're thinking about in the natural resources arena, a water quality education program, potentially our participants could save money by using less pesticides or herbicides. In and of itself, that is huge, right? That's great. And hopefully we would focus our attention on measuring something like that. But we can then connect it more broadly to the public benefit of how in the community that can improve the water quality. Lastly, of these examples, if we think about a nutrition education program, we're working with individuals to improve their health, whether we're teaching them, often it's to eat more fresh fruits and vegetables, and sort of the so what for the community could be decreased healthcare costs. We sort of in A&R take a different public value approach, and I'll share that in a minute. I've seen some questions in the chat, Vikram. Any questions or no?
No questions.
Okay, great. I'll let you tell me when there's a question.
Yeah.
I'm monitor the chat while I'm trying to.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Okay. So I'm going to show you 2 slides of our public values with the respective condition changes. Clint did send out the link to these. I'm hoping that many of you are familiar with these and familiar with the webpage. I do encourage you to go look on the webpage. Each of the condition changes is hyperlinked if that's an area that you work in. And every year we update stories that include your colleagues or your measured outcomes and how that connects to a bigger statewide impact story. These public values and condition changes were developed, like I said, about 4 years ago, working very closely initially with Nancy Franz, but then and all throughout with our strategic initiative leaders, program team leaders, statewide program directors, and then they were sent out more broadly. So just if folks are new, just know that this was very much typical A&R fashion, developed in a grassroots way. We're keeping these for now. If you are a project board user, there is an other, in case you feel like there's some other condition change that your work contributes to that isn't captured in these 24. And we are analyzing that every year. And as an organization, we can consider changing it at a certain point. But at this point, this is what we're working with. All right. So often a question that we get is, how do I connect my work to this big picture, long-term public value? So we often suggest using a simple logic model. It's a tool that many of you are already familiar with, given your work with grant funding agencies, et cetera. So here's a real simple version. Logic model is just illustration of a chain of connection showing what your program is intending to accomplish. If we think about it in real simple terms, on the top in the black there, there's an issue. We got to put some resources towards it. Then you're going to do a bunch of stuff, and then hopefully something good results out of it. So in typical logic model format, it's set up in these boxes on the bottom where you have basically, you talk about your needs assessment, the why you're doing what you're doing. We don't spend a lot of focus on inputs. We do spend time where you articulate what you actually did, right? Not in great scientific method detail, but did you do research? Are you doing workshops? Do you have a journal article? Do you have a fact sheet? How many people came? Those sorts of things. That's under your methods. And then the real reason we use the logic model is it helps us connect our methods to outcomes. And that's what you see in the blue on the right there. Again, we already talked about these different types of outcomes. So the logic model helps us focus on outcomes and make sure they connect in a reasonable, rational way back to what we're actually doing. It helps us make those connections. And we'll talk more later. This just helps you also, when you get to writing, articulate the connections between all of these things. All right, so here's an example. This is actually from A&R Merit and Promotion example. You'll see the word theme there. That's a structure out of project board and our merit and promotion process. So this person had 2 different, a project and a program under invasive species. So the issue was one and the same. There was this problem of invasive species, damaging the ecosystem and causing problems with the rangeland. So in yellow there, you see the yellow star thistle control program, developing new control techniques and then extending those through workshops, and then measuring, moving to the right, that ranchers were gaining knowledge, and then further along, doing a follow-up survey or informal interviews, finding out that the ranchers were actually adopting these control methods. In tandem, that academic was working on research. This research was not yet able to be extended. The research was just being conducted, and it was for 3 other invasive species. And the focus for that work was just getting stuff published. So again, the extension and the clientele outcomes would come later. But the overall so what of that effort of this person's work around invasive species prevention connects to the blue boxes on the far right, where we have our condition changes. That ultimately the point of all of this is reducing the acres of rangeland lost due to invasive species and contributing more broadly to ecological sustainability. So I just want to spend a minute. We're going to get to our first activity shortly here. I want to focus on the outcomes chain. That is just the part where we have our learning outcomes, and then we have our action outcomes, and then we have the longer term condition change outcomes. Again, focusing on the outcomes change is an important part of how we write up our impact statements. So let's look at an example of just an outcomes chain, and then you get to do one yourself for your work. So this
Catherine, there is a question. You want to take it now?
Yep.
So the blue boxes cannot really be measured, right? How do you report that?
I'm assuming that's here.
Yeah, the impact.
So we're actually going to talk a lot about that today. It can be measured, and there's different ways. You may not be the one measuring it. You may be using research and data to make the connection between the participant outcomes that you have to that longer term change. But I do have some examples depending on the type of program you have. We do have colleagues measuring condition changes, but sometimes that doesn't make sense. It's not feasible. And what we do is we leverage existing research to create a safe inference to those blue boxes. Great question. All right, so I'm going to go back to our Master Gardener example. So we were asked, what is the difference that the Master Gardener program is making for the public? A number of years ago, and a lot of the literature across the nation was just looking at the benefit to the volunteers, what they're learning. Is it a high quality program? All of those things are significant. But leadership wanted to know, when the volunteers then go out and do their activities, what's the benefit to the public? What difference are we making to the public? So here's just one small piece for illustrative purposes. So one of the things that they do is teaching about food gardening. They teach about many other things, but for this example, I'm going to focus on that. So participants, the public participants, are being taught by the volunteers, and they're gaining knowledge and skills about food gardening. We can measure that. Then we were more interested, like I said, in focusing our attention on measuring behavior change. So we worked with the Master Gardener program, and they developed a statewide survey to measure behavior change of public participants in volunteer-led activities. And these are some of the outcome indicators that we used. So the number of percent of the participants who started growing edibles or expanded the varieties, or if they're reporting decreased food loss, or they're donating produce in their community. We also ask about the square footage that's being influenced by their new knowledge and practices. So then, all right, that's great for them. And we get back to that, well, so what? What's the benefit to the public? So this is a good illustration, sort of answering that last question about how do we measure or connect to those blue boxes? In this case, we can make this safe inference that those behaviors on the left can increase access in the community to fresh fruits and vegetables by leveraging this study here. I'm not going to read the whole thing here. This study shows that these gardening projects do improve food security in some communities. Ultimately, Then we're connecting to our A&R condition change of improving food security. Part, putting all that together, writing the impact statements. So first, what is an impact statement? It is a brief description of the difference or potential difference your work makes in people's lives. So again, with our applied research, we really have to explain the potential difference because it's not yet at the stage of extending and we can't measure participant outcomes yet. So we're going to say potential difference. So how do we write an impact statement or story? Basically, an impact story is just a longer version. Impact statement is like a paragraph and a story is usually a page or so. So it has these three components. First, you're going to explain the issue. You'll remember that from the logic model. This is where you can talk about, your needs assessment, the priorities that you identified through that effort, the goals that you have. You can describe your clientele, why the issue is important, those sorts of a thing. And then the second part is where you describe what you did, right? These again are your activities and outputs. A common mistake is people thinking that, people showing up to your extension event is an outcome. It's not. It's part of your activity, people coming to your event. Again, when we talk about outcomes, we're talking about the benefits to the people that come, not just the fact that they were there. And also you can talk about, we do so much important collaborative work and have really important partners in the communities where we work. So you can describe your collaborative efforts if that makes sense to your work. Lastly, and probably, definitely most importantly, you want to spend your most time, and I often encourage people to, when you're done, go back and look. You kind of want most of your real estate, the length of your statement or story, to be around the outcomes part. As scientists, we've seen over the years, it's exciting to describe your methods, and you're excited about your research approach and all of these things and working with your colleagues. But the biggest part of your statement or story should not be the part about what you did. You want all three pieces, but you want to be focusing on the outcomes impact. I have a colleague, Scott Cummings from Texas A&M, who does a lot of work around impact writing, and he likes to talk about it, you see on the right. First, you talk about the relevance, your response, and the results. So whatever helps you remember, these are the three key ingredients for an impact statement or story. This is an A&R impact statement. So for the whole organization, very big picture, I color coded it. Again, on our webpage, you'll find the 7 public values with statements like this. And then you have the condition changes with actual measured outcomes. So those are 2 things to reference, especially if you're just getting started and having a hard time thinking about how to frame your work. So the first part here is the issue. We're talking about promoting healthy people. You guys can read faster than I can speak. So the issues in red, then we have what we do in blue. And then lastly, sort of the impact and benefit to participants and more broadly to the public. Again, these are super high level because it's for the organization. I think the impact statements are much more powerful when there's actual data from the work that you do, and we'll look at some of those. I just wanted to make you aware that we have these impact statements as well. So UC Delivers blog follows the same format you can see on the left. It has a section called the issue, and then how UC delivers, that's the what you do part, and then the impact is where you describe the outcomes. It also includes a social media summary. You can see that bolded on the top there. For this example, you see UC-led partnership. It's important for people to know that we work in partnership, right? Resulted in over almost 30,000 pounds of fresh produce being distributed to students and families, and that they were reporting being more food secure. So really quickly, in a short amount of time, you can see what this story is about and how we're doing work to increase access to healthy food in Coachella. So just a little plug to UC Delivers. Kit Alves on the call today. She's the current manager of UC Delivers. We work together to review and provide feedback on those. We're always looking for great local stories. We get them submitted all the time. So if you haven't been there for a little while, you might want to see what amazing outcomes your colleagues are having. When we transitioned to the blog format, those of you that have been around for a long time, we also made a change where the impact in this case, it does need to be a measured outcome, and we require some sort of condition change indicator or research to link to condition change so that that's a safe inference and doesn't seem like a stretch. For UC Delivers, we're not talking about potential impact, we're talking about measured outcomes. But you definitely want to talk about potential impact in your merit promotion and other places. I just wanted to be clear about UC Delivers has a more narrow focus now. We've really kind of strengthened that impact section, I would say. All right, so more tips on how do you make these strong. Being specific is important. Again, if you can, think about measuring, and definitely if you have it, articulate behavior change. You don't have to, you can talk about learning changes. Again, we're just trying to encourage people to focus energy on measuring behavior change when you can. You definitely want to articulate the public value and include condition change indicators, which means including some quantification across the board. So we'll take a look at that. Here are some specific indicators. When we talk about being specific, we're talking about like a learning indicator where you're saying the number and percent of participants who in this case are demonstrating a direct marketing skill, number and percent of dairy producers who have adopted some new practice. Policy changes typically don't come in the number and percent format. It would be like an ordinance is passed or decision makers use the science-based information and in some new policy whatever they wrote up. We've got a bunch of examples. And then a condition change indicator in this case, those can be quantified. Percent or actual size of shoreline and vegetative or natural buffers. So that's an actual environmental outcome that there is this space now that has these buffers that for whatever reason are beneficial to the environment. Okay, more strategies. Another thing we often hear is I only just started my work. So this is sort of the, like, I only just started my project and I'm doing applied research right now. You know, you're just started, you want to talk about the potential impact. And again, it's not the result of one single event or product. Again, that kind of goes back to Hannah's example that she shared before the break. All of her efforts with youth, as well as her efforts with adults, in tandem are working together to create change in the community around climate change preparedness. And sort of back to Cindy's point earlier, you know, do I lump or I split? You know, this is a place where, again, I think lumping can be helpful. And this doesn't mean to say that you need to plan to do massive longitudinal studies. That sometimes is what people hear. I want to be clear that not what we're expecting you to do. There are cases where your colleagues do it. I've seen, you know, 4-H has done some of these. Sometimes people do them, but that's not the organizational expectation. So here's an example of explaining your the potential impact of research. This is from a Riverside specialist. So she talks about the goal. The eventual goal is to inoculate the red broom in the field. Okay, so what we're wondering, those of us that aren't plant scientists, you know, and then she goes on to say, okay, so the potential of that, you know, the commercial availability is some years away, but the so what of that is that there's potential to provide managers a low cost and environmentally friendly solution to invasive brome grasses. So Cindy, that might be kind of a useful example to you. That is an invasive species example, although this isn't in ag, I don't think. So that's one example of potential impact from research. Here is one where Lynn, an advisor, could take it even further and quantify that potential impact by leveraging an existing cost study. So what she did was they were doing, not alone, I'm sure, she did these research trials that showed saving a spray, you could save a spray using this powdery mildew index, which is what they were promoting. She had informal conversations that it looked like people, they said they were using the index and they think they're saving a spray. She had not yet gotten to the point of measuring it. That was a next step. But at the point of writing this up, maybe it was for her merit promotion or whatnot, she wasn't there yet, but she could go further than that to explain the potential impact by using that cost study. So if she estimated, you know, the one applied spray costs $82 per acre. That was from the cost study. One fewer spray on 8,000 acres estimated could save, you know, all that money in the area where she works. So hopefully it's helpful to see a couple examples of using the approach of describing your potential impact from your research. Because again, research is an important part of what we do. We're just encouraging folks to be able to take it further and explain the difference that that research will make. Okay, so another big question or concern we often get, and kind of goes back to a point that Stephen Worker made in the chat, you know, I'm not responsible for all this change. Are we, you know, sort of over exaggerating our connection? Again, we're not encouraging folks to make claims that don't feel comfortable or aren't realistic. These really should be based on data and research. So that's why we call them these safe inferences. You may not be measuring them. Again, I'll show you some examples where people do, but these aren't just pie in the sky. I did this and oh yeah, it's definitely improving air quality. We really need to leverage the data and research for these safe inferences to be credible and compelling.
Catherine,
again,
there is a question you want to answer about
okay.
Potential impact.
Go ahead.
Does a potential impact need to be distinguished in some way from an actual impact?
Yeah.
In reporting?
Definitely. You would want to explain the potential impact of this work. And I would say, you know, if you've done your logic model, I mean, some things often are iterative and organic, but if you've sort of thought about your program design and you have a plan, you know, in a year or so, I want to focus my energy on measuring the adoption of whatever practice or tool you've developed. You could say, even include that, you know, my applied research, it's been published. It's gone out in these different public press articles. Next year, I'm going to do a workshop and I plan to measure adoption of this. Ultimately, research shows that that will save growers X number of dollars or whatever it might be. I just want to point out this word contributes here. I really encourage folks, we use that word a lot in our writing. It's not the only way to explain it, but we're not saying that our work is causal, right? That we're causing the delta to be cleaner. We're saying that our work, because of research, shows that if people are cover cropping, there's less sediment going into the delta and the water is cleaner. Totally made up that example, but hopefully you get my drift. So I want to talk a little bit more about how do we actually use that data in research? Where do you find it? So we've developed this sort of A, B, or C. So sometimes you actually may be able to collect it. You're not expected to always collect it, and it may or may not make sense for you. I'm going to show you some examples where it made sense for some colleagues in certain circumstances, so that may be an option for you. Otherwise, you're going to leverage existing research or data to make that safe inference, which I've been talking about throughout this presentation. I'm going to show you some examples from your colleagues now. I've broken them down into components to be able to make some points, but they are actually all written up in an impact story format on our program eval webpage in the How to Measure Condition Change fact sheet. So I just want to point that out. It would have been too much for you to all read on a slide. And we can follow up with that resource afterwards too. Okay, so we have an impact story about reintroducing grazing and how that improves land management. This is from Sheila Berry. So she developed these particular practices to the point of improved conservation. She informed county decision makers of these practices and was working with them to develop conservation plans. Sorry, hold on, there. Because she's just working with a few agencies and they're in close conversation, she knew that they were adopted and that they implemented those plans based on the science that she had worked with them. So that's a huge policy change that was pretty easy for her to measure. Oops, going the wrong way. So because those plans were implemented, this is a measured condition change, environmental condition change, that grazing was reintroduced on all of these acres, and the research had shown why that was beneficial. The ultimate condition change that she was linking her work to was improved management and use of land. I'm going to share another story on improving almond rootstocks, increasing production and profitability. This is from Catherine Jarvis Sheen, an Orchard Systems advisor. Yeah, I have a bit of a story to tell as I go through this one. So she adopted, or basically another advisor retired, and so she took over these rootstock trials that were already in existence when she was hired. And they were specifically looking at issues with boron toxicity. So there were these research findings that found these rootstocks to be particularly helpful in that situation. So she knew from talking to growers that that improved rootstock was being adopted. Growers were planting it, and she wrote that on project board. And I read that, and I wanted to know, well, did you actually measure it? How many growers? How many acres? You know, because sometimes people just say that and you don't know if it's measured. And again, one of the key rules is quantifying. Well, she wasn't able to get that, but then she realized what she could get because she was working with the nurseries was sales data. She was working with 3 nurseries, and 2 of them she worked very closely with, and she just asked them for the sales data. And so she was able to show that over time, I don't have the chart here, there's more data in the story and the chart. She was able to show that people were buying it more. So people were actually adopting this new rootstock that we had developed. Oops. Okay, and so linking this particular story to increased our condition change has agriculture and forestry together. Really, this one is just connecting to increased agricultural efficiency and profitability. And she was able to demonstrate that with that measured condition change indicator data that she got. So this is an impact story on change in food choices and how they improve health. This is from Chutima, an NFCS advisor. And this is where she's going to leverage using existing research to make that safe inference. So like many of our nutrition education programs, she, in this case, was doing classes specifically with adults. You can see the curriculum listed there. So then she was able to measure 93% of the participants showed improvement in 1 or more of the diet quality indicators. And with our nutrition programs and often with our youth development programs, there's a lot of different behavior change indicators. So this is just sort of an aggregate summary that is often how folks write it up, the one that I'm using here. So they showed an improvement in 1 or more diet quality indicators. So she can then go on to say that these behaviors, these improvements are associated with better health outcomes. So she's not actually measuring that the participants have better health themselves, but there's, as you might imagine, a lot of research. You can see that's actually a hyperlink to the journal article. And this is what we do when UC delivers. When we make the connection between our measured outcomes, measured participant outcomes to condition change. If we don't have our own condition change indicator data, we link to research to make that safe inference. This is from a UC delivers. And then this then connects to the ANR condition change of improved health for all. This is an impact story of increasing understanding, so a learning outcome, and how that then contributes to ecological sustainability in agriculture. Oop. Something happened. I'm sorry, that one is missing. I'm not sharing that one with you. I think I had to cut out. I have a lot of examples. We didn't have time for them all. So I'm going to move on to water one. This is the program, Marin Friendly Garden Walks Save Water. And this is that, as you see a C at the top up there, this is where Stephen Swain, environmental hort advisor, was able to use data from their agency partner to have actual condition change data for the story. This was a program that went on for a long time and was in close partnership with the water district. So yeah, 10-year period, Master Garden volunteers conducted all these garden walks. That was the intervention. And they developed this study to estimate water savings. So they were, the point was for people to be adopting water conservation practices. They weren't actually measuring that. They didn't interview or survey all the people. Instead, they were able, from their agency partner, to look at the water usage on the houses that they had gone to with their intervention. And they were able to say that, all this water, it's not necessarily causal, but contributed to, actually this one, they did do a control group. So they were able to say this was the exact amount of water saved. And they had the percentage of reduction in the client's water usage as a result. That then connects to the A&R condition change of improving water use efficiency. I think that might be my last example. Again, those aren't written up in a narrative format here on my slides, but we do have the stories if you want to see how you write this up. But the point is, these are the pieces that you really want to connect when you're writing up your impact statement. See, I haven't looked at the chat. Are there any questions or key comments, Vikram, that I should address before we move on?
There is a question I answered, but you can chime in. Is the preferred term safe inference or reasonable inference or logical inference? And I said that we are using safe inference, and that is the term used in most other states.
Great. All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and move on. At any time, please ask